go ahead and get started so that Jade has plenty of time to present. So I just have a few updates. So welcome. I know people are going to continue to trickle in. Happy to see some new and unfamiliar faces and names. So happy that you guys are here. Hopefully, we'll be able to continue to do more of these webinars and just offer everybody more opportunity. Maybe you're not able to make it to a chapter meeting. We're just trying to offer more diversity, more opportunities for people to be able to get involved and get some CEUs. So let's kick it off. All right, so let's start with just a few introductions, a few hellos. So if you're not intimately familiar with the region, I just kind of want to give you a bird's eye view very quickly on who's within regional leadership. So starting with me, of course, there's me right there. So I'm Abby Holovach, if I've not met you, from Fort Worth, Texas. So love me some Region 3. We've got a lot of great folks within Region 3. We do a lot of great stuff. So there's me, your regional vice president. And this is some of our ladies of the region. So we have Belinda, Keitha, Patricia, Rachel, Jeannie, and Jennifer. So if you've not met these ladies and you have an opportunity to at some point, definitely do so. And then, of course, we have the men of Region 3 as well. So these are our Region 3 officers. So we have Stan, Dustin, Jaron, Jeffrey, and Lynn. As well as, of course, many other people who support the region, in a variety of different capacities. Like I know we've got Jim Rainwater on here. He's a previous Region 3 RVP, amongst many other things. So we've got a really great powerhouse of folks. Again, if you're not familiar with how the Region 3 really is structured within the chapters, so we do have North area chapters and South area chapters. So North area, we've got Arkansas, East Texas, Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, South Plains, Southwest, and Tulsa. And then South area under Miss Patricia, we've got Central Texas, Coastal Bend, Gulf Coast, Permian Basin, Sabine Neches, and South Texas. So a little bit of everything for anybody wherever you're located. This just gives you kind of a nice visual of Region 3 spread. So across 3 different states, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And one of our big initiatives within Region 3 this new term is really continuing to try to bring together all of these chapters because we're stronger together, as is, the saying of ASSP in general. So we really want to embody that. So thus things like this webinar. All right, so trucking right along here. I don't want to take up too much of Jade's time, but just want to give you guys a few updates and news within Region 3. So we do have our upcoming elections for South Area Director. So this is a 3-year term. Right now, Miss Patricia is in this role, and she has been, I think, for, like 4 or 5 years at this point, because she stepped in midterm and then had to have her full 3-year term as well. So right now, we've got Lynn Richardson and Belinda Powers. Those are our 2 candidates for Region 3 South Area Director. So this term will run from 2026 to 2029. So this is a 3-year term. You will get, if you're an ASSP member, of course, everybody on here, you'll get a link for voting. So come March, that'll start hitting your inbox. So it is all virtual voting. But take a moment, if you have time, get onto the membership elections page within Region 3. You can find it there as well. But on the main ASSP page, if you actually click their names, you'll be able to kind of read their platform statements, what they're all about. So give that a shot, give that a try. So that way we've got some good background on both candidates, but they're both amazing. So, we really can't go wrong. We do have 2 new Region 3 committees. So we have established a new financial committee, really trying to standardize budgets, tracking, and really just how we function financially as a whole within Region 3. So that new financial committee, we just started that at the beginning of the year. So hopefully we'll see continued improvement there, just continuing to make things better. And then our new student leadership committee. So we are going to have our student leadership conference in spring 2027. We just started planning for that. So basically it's where we bring in all these students from all these different chapters, all these different schools, and have, a day and a half to 2 days set aside just for them. So we're really working on trying to make that as beneficial for them as possible. So if you want to get involved with either committee, just give me a shout. We are actively accepting award nominations within Region 3, so the Safety Professional of the Year, as well as Hall of Fame Award, and we're also trying to get a new award off the ground for Educator of the Year. So if you know someone who deserves nomination, definitely reach out. So Lynn Richardson is our current awards and honors chair. His information is right there, and I will share this presentation after the fact. So you could also go through and click on those links and kind of see what the criteria is for those awards. So check that out if you know someone's that who's worthy, and feel free to nominate yourself. I nominate myself for awards all the time. So you got to go in there and get it. All right, another cool upcoming event. This is next week. This is February 26th and 27th. This is at Southeastern Oklahoma State University. They do a really cool event called the Safety Olympics. They do it every year for the past couple years. So they have all these different schools. You can kind of see the list of schools there, the 2026 competing teams. They all come together and do, I think it was like 8 different events. It's really cool. I've been a judge for the training competition for the past couple years, and it's a really cool experience. Fortunately, I can't go this year. I've got a course I'm teaching. But if you do want to volunteer, if even if you just want to attend it's a really great job fair that they have here as well. So all these different organizations will come in. So there's a lot of good opportunity there as well. So if you know someone who's looking for a job, could be a good opportunity. So feel free to reach out to Dr. Melena Nichols. She is over this event. She's the program coordinator for their health and safety degree there. So she's awesome. So check that out. And then 2 other upcoming events we have. So February 27th. So that is next Friday. The Region 3 Spring Town Hall meeting. We're going to be getting together to meet your Region 3 South Area Director candidates. So that's going to be Lynn and Belinda, and kind of just hear firsthand what their leadership vision is. So that's going to help you with your vote. We'll also talk more in depth about some of our key initiatives, some of our updates within the region. So if you're able to attend that, another great way to get involved and kind of get into the nitty gritty of what Region 3's been up to. And then in March, we do have another webinar with Dr. Bob Emery. So that will be over ethics. So if you have a certification where you need ethics credits, here's another way to get it. So we're currently waiting on our CEU approval. That should be any time now. Then we'll be ready to rock and roll. So feel free to get registered for that one as well. And then last announcement here in terms of upcoming events. So the Region 3 PDC, our professional development conference, is going to be in San Antonio this year. We've been posting a lot about it, but we're still accepting speakers. So if you like to speak or you know someone who would be a great speaker, encourage them to apply. Very easy to apply. It's on our website, on our Region 3 PDC page. So feel free to jump in there. Obviously, feel free to get registered as well as an attendee. And if you want to sponsor or exhibit, we're accepting all of those right now. So feel free to check that out too. And then last little thing I just wanted to share, just in case you've not really gotten onto our webpage recently, I highly recommend that you do. So we've been trying to make a lot of updates within the Region 3 webpage so that it is comprehensive and as helpful as possible to membership and beyond. So if you go to our events tab, not only do we have all these Region 3 events, but we also have all of the different chapter events, many of which are virtual that you can attend. We're also trying to include external, maybe free trainings, free webinars, things like that. And there's also a new tab within events for all of the free ASSP events and webinars. So definitely get into our webpage, check it out. Most up to date, most current, a lot of photos, news announcements. So don't sleep on our webpage. We got a lot of good info there. And then, of course, if you're not yet connected with us on LinkedIn, please do as well. That's where you're going to see all of the latest updates and reminders. So definitely connect with us on LinkedIn. Now, at the end of this webinar, I will in the chat drop in a link, and it's going to be for your CEU credit. So I'm going to need for you to go in here and put your first and last name and then your email. So that way I can send you the CEU link. There will also be a link for a feedback form. So you'll see actually 2 things within the email that I send to you guys. So just make sure you actually get this done because this is how you're going to get your CEU credit. All right, enough of me. Let's get into our speakers. So I'm really excited to hear from Jade. So I'd seen Jade on LinkedIn posting about dangerous goods, and I love learning and hearing and talking about hazmat. So I was like, oh, perfect person. So I'm really excited that she's here to be able to cover dangerous goods. So with that, I'm going to let Jade take over, and the rest of the time is yours, Jade.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Hey, Abby, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so glad you're here. And the information, the link, I have not quite sent it yet. I'll send it probably about 30 minutes into our presentation or so, and then you'll have that to input your data.
Perfect. Let me know when you can see my screen, okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Presentation today is primarily surrounding how dangerous goods can has the potential to erode EBITDA. One of the things that I want to mention very early on is I totally understand that not everyone necessarily deals with dangerous goods, but from a safety perspective, I definitely challenge everyone to kind of think through some of the thought processes during this presentation and hope that you learn something new about DG if you haven't interacted with it.
Hey Jade, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say my it looks like we can see on your end like the little thing in the upper right hand corner. Like my name is huge and I don't want it to obstruct your. Oh, perfect. Okay, it's gone. There you go.
All right, good to go. Thank you for that. I'm not entirely sure what can show up, but this is great. All right. So warm welcome. About a little bit about me. As Abby mentioned, she reached out to me on LinkedIn, and when she asked me to speak about my favorite topic, I absolutely could not say no. So here I am today, and really happy to spend some time with the ASSP group. I am a little bit about me. I am a global leader in dangerous goods compliance. I have a lot of passion, obviously, and expertise in this regulatory subject. I currently work for GXO Logistics. We're the world's largest pure play third party logistics company. We operate in 27 countries. So, obviously, this role really requires an individual that has passion and expertise. Um, I like to highlight that my key strength is translating complexity into clear business strategy. I actually have a mentor who does not absolutely love compliance people, right? And that was the reason that that individual became my mentor. But one of the things that I really took away from and continue to take away from our conversations is how can we, from a compliance perspective, um, reduce the complexity and communicate about dangerous goods or even compliance requirements in a way that everyone understands. So I've been challenged this year to do that, and that's absolutely um, where this idea came from in terms of tying dangerous goods requirements into finances, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's something I'm very much so passionate about. I consider myself a compliance architect. I've been in the EHSQ field a little bit over 18 years, actually. I say 18 years to make myself feel pretty good. I have a master's in occupational safety and health. I actually graduated with that master's, I want to say December of last year. I am now actually working through studying for my LSAT because I plan to pursue a law degree um, from a compliance perspective. So, more to come about that. I have been a speaker at the Label Master 2025 Global Dangerous Goods Symposium. I speak at Women in Construction conferences, NSC conferences, and obviously ASSP. My favorite book is Atomic Habits. And the reason I'm sharing that is because I actually utilize several quotes and really concepts from Atomic Habits. I'm not sure if well, for the sake of anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to actually read Atomic Habits, if you don't have the book, I would totally suggest ordering it. No, I don't get paid for this, but there was a story in Atomic Habits that really, really stood out to me, and it was actually chapter one. And it was related to this British cycling team. They were competing in the Olympics. They had very limited expertise. They had actually not won in the Olympics, won any medals for almost 100 years. And then they had a new leader that came in. His name was Dave Brazelford. And he had this really simple philosophy that really, really stood out to me. His philosophy was the aggregation of marginal gains, right? And he talked about, or his belief was, if we take really, really small actions and they kind of compound, they build upon themselves, eventually we get to a point where we have really extraordinary results. That was his belief. So he took this cycling team and he basically, they engaged in a lot of different activities. They started redesigning the bike seats, very small things that you wouldn't think would absolutely um, contribute to the success from a team competition perspective. But they redesigned the bike seats. They actually hired someone to train them on how to wash their hands so that that the competitors didn't get sick. They did like a lot of sleep studies. They changed their pillows and their mattresses. They even painted the inside of their um, I think it was a bus or a van that they transported the bikes in, but they painted the inside of it white so that they could see if there was any dust or anything inside of the vehicle. Now, obviously, none of those changes contribute to success individually by itself, but they eventually got to a point where all of the things that they did just 1% better in each area. Actually, they had some really, really great results from that. So they ended up winning a lot of medals. They became Olympic champions and really huge winners. So I wanted to share that because that is the kind of the thought process behind dangerous goods, how it impacts our finances from a financial perspective or how it impacts a business from a financial perspective. So I'm going to jump into everything and then we'll kind of tie all of this together in terms of atomic habits and dangerous goods compliance and finances. I'll start with what is dangerous goods for anyone who hasn't had a chance to actually interact with dangerous goods or hazmat. Now, in the United States, the term dangerous goods, hazmat, hazardous materials, those terms are typically utilized interchangeably, but they all really mean the same thing. The definition of hazmat is any material or substance capable of posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property when transported in commerce. That is the Department of Transportation or U.S. Secretary of Transportation's definition of dangerous goods slash hazmat. Obviously, there are a few other definitions, but they all lean towards the material posing an unreasonable risk. Hazardous materials can range from anything like explosives to common substances that we utilize in our households, such as cleaners. It can be perfumes, it can be lithium batteries that we have in our computers and in our laptops. So there's a really wide range of hazardous materials. Hazardous materials are classified and identified by really test data. So there's 9 hazard classes. We determine what hazard class the material fits into based on the test data. So if a substance or material meets the criteria for any class is classified as a dangerous goods and then it becomes regulated. That's the point that we really have to pay attention to from an organizational perspective. That's where the SDSs come in handy because SDSs typically will provide an indicator whether or not that material is regulated. And if it is regulated, then from an organizational perspective, we do have a lot of requirements that we absolutely have to adhere to as we are shipping that material to and from our facilities. Classified dangerous goods are assigned a 4-digit UN number. That UN number is utilized internationally. So it doesn't matter if you're in the United States and you're shipping to the UK, you're shipping to Canada, you're shipping to Mexico. Doesn't really matter where you ship that material to, that 4-digit number is recognized internationally and it helps each group each team interacting with the material understand exactly what it is. There are 9 hazard classes, and for the sake of this conversation, I do want to kind of review this. So there are 9 hazard classes. Class 1 is explosives. So those are, we kind of deal with explosives every year, July the 4th, actually. So fireworks are considered explosives. There are also explosives such as blasting agents, ammunition, some airbags, and stuff like that. But fireworks is the most common example of class 1 hazmat, which falls under explosives. You have class 2, which is gases, and that includes things like the propane tanks that some families actually utilize. It includes things like oxygen cylinders, sometimes aerosol sprays, flammable gases, etc. Class 3 is flammable liquids and combustible liquids. We all interact with class 3. Obviously, if we have a vehicle that requires us to fill it up with gasoline versus an electric vehicle, we're interacting with gasoline, which is a class 3 flammable liquid. Um, Sometimes you'll actually see the trucks on the road with the placards as you drive down the highway. And I'm sure, I know after I mention this, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm seeing a lot of placards on the highway. I'm driving past a lot of flammable material." Class 4 is flammable solids, spontaneously combustible and dangerous when wet materials. That can be things like, in terms of flammable solids, something that we interact with or used to interact with quite often before lighters were created was the matches. So matches are like considered flammable solids. Class 5, oxidizers and organic peroxides. So if you have a pool or you've been to a pool, that would include kind of like the pool chemicals, hair bleach can even fall under this category. Class 6, poison, toxics, poison inhalation hazards. That includes things like pesticides and certain medical parts and stuff like that. Radioactive materials, that can also include certain medical devices if they've been exposed to radioactive treatments. Then we have class 8, and there are quite a few other things that fall into radioactive. I'm just trying to give a few examples of things that we kind of interact with on a daily basis, but there's actually a long list of stuff that fall under class 1 through 9. Class 8 is corrosive materials. So those are things like battery acid, drain cleaner is considered corrosive. Class 9, miscellaneous, that's a really broad category, but a lot of things that we ship out, especially in the United States, typically fall under class 9. So class 9 can include the lithium batteries. It includes dry ice. It can include airbags and stuff like that. Lithium batteries are a huge, huge, huge topic of, it's a huge area of focus. So, and all of us are typically dealing with the lithium batteries. We have them in our computers, we have them in our phones, they're in our wireless devices, they're in wireless drills, they're literally everywhere. So, at some point or another throughout our daily lives, we interact with this material from a hazmat perspective. For some organizations might, depending on what customers or what industry you're in, might potentially ship this material out as well. What regulations are used? So we utilize 49 CFR. 49 CFR is basically the law of the land from a US perspective. 49 CFR governs how we ship hazardous materials from an organizational perspective. Um, Air We utilize IATA or ICAO dangerous goods regulations to ship out the materials. And then marine, we have International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code that governs how we ship out hazardous materials by vessel. So we have ground, air, and vessel. I did mention this in the slide. I did not mention it in the slide, but rail is also covered under the US 49 CFR regulations. So, where does DG exist in your industry? We have multiple industries. I listed a few common ones here. Manufacturing, typically, I've seen a lot of flammable liquids, whether solvents, paints, other flammables, corrosives, toxic chemicals. If you're in chemical or pharmaceutical, there's a lot of toxic substances, flammable liquids and gases, and corrosives. Healthcare, I mentioned earlier, radioactive materials. I didn't mention infectious substances, but that's another um, type of material or substance that is regulated by the Department of Transportation. We have retail and e-commerce. That typically is everything that you see, or not everything that you see, but a lot of things that you'll see on Amazon. If you utilize Amazon to order stuff, you'll notice that they'll have like there's a lot of products that sometimes are shipped to our houses, and then you'll notice that with Amazon they won't allow the customers to ship certain things back because the material is considered hazmat. It can be things like lithium batteries, cordless drills, as I mentioned. They typically will allow, I haven't seen any challenges with like laptops and phones and stuff like that, but it is lithium batteries. It is hazmat. Flammable liquids from a retail or e-com perspective, that can be things like the different perfumes, different colognes. Aerospace and aviation has a lot of lithium batteries, flammable liquids, lots of airbags. They actually have oxygen generators too. Electronics and technology, once again, lithium batteries. As you all can see, there's a kind of a common theme in terms of lithium batteries, flammable liquids, corrosive chemicals. So we'll get to the meat of things. The real question is, how does DG quietly, emphasis on quietly, erode EBITDA? Before we get into the conversation, I do want to touch quickly on what EBITDA is. So it's basically earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. In simple terms, it's really a measure that businesses use to understand how much money the business makes before the accounting and the financial factors come out. Executives typically use EBITDA to understand operational performance, profitability, margin strength, and company value. As a safety professional or as an individual engaged in compliance efforts, if you can tie compliance to EBITDA, you're then speaking the language that CEO, the operations teams understands, and it really gets you further as a compliance professional. One of the things that I always like to point out is, and this is something that was highlighted by the mentor that I spoke about earlier, who has been really impactful um, in my professional development, regardless of how long I've been in the field. Communication matters. If you say this is an OSHA violation, this is an EPA violation, this is a 49 CFR violation, um, that really sounds to another individual, an operations individual, you sound like a regulatory person, right? And there's nothing wrong with being a regulatory person, but we have to alter, or we would, it's best to consider altering our communication depending on the audience. If you say this causes EBITDA leakage, you sound like a business partner. It's been proven time and time again, especially as I've seen this in person. I interact with obviously a lot of global teams, um, and from an operations perspective, operations is really concerned about throughput. They're concerned about safety. They're concerned about ensuring that everyone obviously leaves the workplace the same way that they came. They also understand things from a financial perspective because that's just the way that their brains are wired. So we'll jump into a few things that can absolutely impact EBITDA. One is unpriced labor minutes. I like to highlight this because there are lots of organizations that are engaged in shipping hazmat, whether it's shipping out lithium batteries, whether it's shipping out computers, um, different wireless devices. There are lots of organizations that are shipping out hazardous materials at one point or another, whether it's a return or a rejected shipment or a site that received some material that should not have received it. So lots of organizations engage in shipping out hazmat. When we think about labor, one of the biggest challenges is unpriced labor. I'm using a scenario actually of like a regulated shipment versus a non-regulated shipment. So the scenario is we have a non-regulated shipment of shirts, and then we have a regulated shipment of lithium ion batteries, and we're shipping it from somewhere in the US to Canada. Now, the non-regulated shipment, when you look in, when you, especially within 3PLs, right, or within other business industries as well, when you look at a non-regulated air shipment, if the material isn't regulated, it takes about 5 minutes to get it all together. The printing of the label, the working through the warehouse management system or whatever system the team is using to ship out the material and then loading it for outbound is relatively quick. You don't have any considerations from a packaging perspective, from a documentation perspective. You don't require anyone that is certified to oversee that process. So you're able to really pick, pack, and ship that material quite quickly. Now, if you have a regulated air shipment, prep time can easily be really over 40 minutes. I was a bit it was a bit kind with the amount of time, but it can take a little bit, 25 to 40 minutes. It can also take a little bit over that. Air shipments require specific UN packaging. And without getting too technical, UN specification packaging is basically packaging that is required from a regulatory perspective as you engage in shipping out certain types of hazardous materials. So remember the classes 1 through 9 that I mentioned. Um, the teams are, as they engage in shipping out that material, that those classes 1 through 9 are all assigned different UN specification packaging. Sometimes they have exceptions, but there are usually, especially when shipping fully regulated, there are usually requirements from a hazmat packaging perspective. There are also labels that the team is required to place on the materials depending on the hazard classes, depending on the quantity of the material. And then there's also the shipping or the shipper's declaration for air shipments. It also requires dangerous goods certified employees to review the shipment. So before, from a hazmat perspective, if you're shipping non-haz, you're perfectly fine. You can ship that stuff out. If you're shipping anything that falls under hazardous materials regulations, if it is regulated, then from an organizational perspective, as safety professionals, we're required to ensure that the individuals that are engaged in shipping out that hazardous materials have the proper training. That is a requirement, 49 CFR requirement as well. So you have DG certified employee review, you have the carrier acceptance. I included a quick kind of like a screenshot on the left hand side for the 2026 air checklist. So any materials like hazardous materials that are going by air, the material should typically undergo an audit. There are some instances where audits are not absolutely required due to the processes that are set up specific to that particular facility. But I wanted to share the checklist. There's actually 2 pages that I wasn't able to fit on the slides. There's actually 2 pages, but there is a huge verification that goes into making sure that the air shipment is in compliance with regulations. So when I looked at the checklist, there's over 53 um, line items that need to be verified prior to shipping out the material. And interestingly enough, even if the organization is engaged in shipping out the same type of material, the checklist would be applicable for each shipment, if that makes sense. There are higher labor, materials, and rejection driven rework. So, if that material was shipped out for some reason or another, the air carrier rejected it, then there's a whole nother workflow that happens behind the scenes. The um, the main idea here is unpriced compliance effort equals EBITDA leakage. So, if you have a non-regulated shipment, you ship it out quickly. Regulated shipment, you're not able to ship it out as quickly. The challenge with that is tying it back to EBITDA and how the erosion happens. The challenge is with this regulated shipment, the labor hours increase significantly. You're going from 5 minutes prep time to 40 minutes prep time, but the revenue for that particular site stays the same and the margin shrinks. The second one is rework from carrier rejections. Um, so when we mention carrier rejections, basically what I'm referring to is any hazardous material shipment that was offered to a carrier. And the carrier comes back to the organization and they either email them or they call them or they send them a note in the mail, but the carriers indicate that the organization was out of compliance because the shipment did not include the proper marks, the proper labels. Sometimes there are paperwork issues. There are really lots of things that could potentially be wrong. But when a rejection happens, that impacts the organization tremendously. You have the shipments will typically either be sent back to the site or they will be required to be picked up depending on the compliance issue from the carrier. And when I speak about carriers, I'm really referring to common carriers that we see all the time: FedEx, UPS, USPS, different LTL carriers, SEVA and XPO, all of those carriers. Um, so when that rejection happens, the site is required to ensure that the material is, once they receive it back on the dock, they have to reprint the documentation. They have to probably like relabel the shipment. They might have to repackage the shipment. There are obviously delays especially from a customer perspective. So it definitely impacts our customer satisfaction. There are storage challenges because initially, if that material left the facility, and it came back to the facility, then it's taking up space that isn't paid for at that point. In short, all of that is really, it falls under non-productive labor, and we can't bill a customer for something that has already happened. So where EBITDA erodes in this particular instance is the rework area. When we rework processes, when we rework shipments or whatever, any rework or most rework equals expense with no associated revenue. Obviously, we wouldn't go back to the customer and say, "Hey, we're reworking this particular um, order, or there's something that has to be reworked within the business, and we'd like you to pay for it." Right? So no one's really doing that, or no one would, I hope. So that's expense with no associated revenue. And obviously, that's net cost increase. Then the third example and the final example is slower throughput and lost capacity. There is room for opportunity there. Um, Once again, for organizations that are shipping out hazardous materials, hazmat, as I mentioned, takes way longer to process than a non-hazmat shipment. So if you have a lane that could process maybe 100, maybe 200 shipments per hour. As a matter of fact, I actually visited a site last week in California, and they're able to process. I think they mentioned like over 1,000 shipments per hour. They had a pretty automated process, but they're processing 1,000 shipments per hour, non-hazmat orders. The hazmat materials take a way longer time to process, right? So you can process 1,000 hazmat orders in 1 hour. You can also, from a hazmat perspective, if you're doing if you're ensuring that the business is engaged in the checks and balances, it might be 300 orders per hour, which is a really significant difference. So DG shipments due to I list IATA checklist verifications, but there are also verifications for, remember I mentioned DOT or 49 CFR. There are also verifications for IMDG. IMDG is basically regulations specific to shipping out hazardous materials by vessel. There are also checklists for those modes of transportation as well. I kind of highlight the IATA checklist. But there are lots of different verifications that we have within these checklists. The orders, they require dangerous goods individuals, like individuals to be certified to dangerous goods. They require oversight. There are lots of additional packaging steps. If anyone's interested, as a matter of fact, to kind of dive a little bit deeper into dangerous goods and understand what the DG certified oversight looks like, or what those additional packaging steps looks like, those can definitely be like another entire learning session. But if you're interested, definitely reach out. Um, Reduced throughput means fewer billable units. And then in this place where EBITDA Road says we have lower volume processed with the same fixed cost base. So if we have a warehouse that is kind of looking at all of the shipments the same, and we're charging the same amount for all of the shipments instead of separating the dangerous goods shipments, then we we are impacted by lower productivity, and then obviously that impacts EBITDA as well. I'm going back to the comment that I made initially in terms of Atomic Habits being one of my favorite books, and the idea behind Atomic Habits was these um, incremental things that we do that absolutely compound and they build up. So 1% erosion of EBITDA over time across an organization, it doesn't sound like much in the very beginning, but it absolutely can negatively impact a business and have a really massive impact. I'm showing an example. Once again, it's a bit conservative in all honesty, but I'm showing an example for three things that I mentioned during the call today. One is overpriced labor minutes, or unpriced labor minutes. I'm sorry, unpriced labor minutes. So one is unpriced labor minutes. The other one is rework from carrier rejections, and then the slower capacity and lost throughput. Those are the top things I wanted to highlight during this call today. There are many more, but for the sake of time, those are three that consistently um, really cause challenges if an organization isn't paying attention to it. So I plugged in a few numbers just to provide kind of a quick um, a quick look at how it could potentially impact the business. So we have the unpriced labor minutes at a little bit over $121,000 per year, rework from carrier rejections, a bit over $18,000 a year, and then the slower capacity and lost throughput, a little bit over $47,000 a year. On a yearly basis, $187,000, it might not seem much, especially if you're within an organization, within a really huge organization. It doesn't really sound like much. But when we introduce scope, we see a huge shift, right? So I kind of did some numbers or put together some numbers for, okay, what if you are working for a company that has over 300 sites? What then for the same scenarios, the same three scenarios, on price, labor, rework, slower capacity. Then when you kind of scale this across 300 sites, you're looking at over 56 million per year in terms of EBITDA erosion. So those are the things that we want to look at. Those are the things that we really need to look at. This is a quote from the book Atomic Habits, and the writer consistently throughout the book indicates you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. That really stood out to me because we can create goals, and we do. We create organizations create goals, they have objectives. Um, They do that. We typically engage in creating goals and objectives all the time. But if those goals are not attached to a system, that creates a really significant challenge. And I can't remember whether this was in the book or whether it was something I thought of. It was probably in the book. Um, there was an example of um, an individual. As a matter of fact, it was in the book. There was an example of a system in place. So the goal was to keep a certain room in a house clean. And then the system, there wasn't a system in place. So the individual cleaned the room, they met the goal, but that it wasn't sustainable because they didn't have a system in place to ensure that they were operating within, or their behavior didn't match their goal. So systems are very much so important. I have an example of this outside of the book. I have an example of like goals versus systems. Goals is be compliant. How many times have we heard that from a compliance perspective? Our goal is to ensure that the entire organization is in compliance with XYZ. Or from a compliance perspective, our goal is to avoid fines. Or sometimes the goal is to increase margin, depending on the safety professional that you're talking to and how well tapped in they are to the financial aspects of the organization. And then you have systems. Systems are really the way that we ensure that the goal is met. So I use systems that are specific to dangerous goods. Obviously, this can be anything from an environmental perspective, from a safety perspective. But the systems that I highlight during this presentation are standardized onboarding checklists from a DG perspective. That system impacts the goal. Trained and retrained employees to the hazmat certifications. If there is a solid system in place, that impacts the goal of being compliant. Warehouse management system capturing like key information from a hazardous materials perspective. That is a system in place that impacts the organization's ability to be in compliance. Hazmat surcharge built into pricing models that impacts increasing the margin and ensuring that the organization is protected from a financial perspective. So the really intent of this slide is not only from a DG perspective, but from an EHS perspective. If our system is level 2, our EBITDA will perform at level 2 no matter how big our goals are. So we can have really, really huge goals in place. And if we don't have the systems in place to support those goals, it's very much so difficult to um, see growth from a financial perspective. How do we design high maturity systems or DG systems that protect EBITDA? One is quality systems. I always like to start with quality systems because most organizations do have a quality department. And when we can engage, when we actively engage in ensuring that compliance processes are integrated into these quality management systems, whether it's utilizing SWIs, standard work instructions, SOPs, standard operating procedures, etc. When we utilize these platforms and we utilize the processes, we're ultimately able to reduce variability and the errors that come out of it or could potentially happen and as the workforce engages in certain activities. Digital tools and automation, obviously, that's a really huge one. We definitely want to utilize digital tools, automation, technology to support compliant shipping of hazmat, but also support compliance from compliance perspective. There are a lot of things that are out on the market today, even from an EHS perspective. Um, I was reading something about these suits that individuals can wear if they're picking up different types of material. It helps to reduce that load and reduce the impact to the person's body by wearing these suits. And probably, I saw it on the internet somewhere. I should have included an example, but that's a pretty good example of utilizing technology, digital tools, automation. Auditing framework, we talk about auditing all the time, but if the audits are not designed in a manner that protects the business, supports the business, uncovers the root cause, then we really want to look at that auditing framework and update it because it is the absolute key to ensuring that from a financial perspective, um, we're not losing um, money in that area. And then training and culture. So, training, obviously, I won't talk too much about this because I think it's something that every safety professional understands. Um, Training impacts our workforce, it impacts the workforce's awareness. It just impacts so many different things. So, training and culture is really huge. How this connects to you. So, if you're a safety professional, environmental professional, if you have a DG role, if you're supporting an organization that has any really compliance activities that they're required to engage in, Um, it doesn't matter whether you're in EHS, environmental, dangerous goods, quality, operations, engineering, sales and solutions. You're absolutely part of that system that really ultimately decides whether the company is going to be successful, whether margin is protected, whether you're enabling revenue, avoiding regulatory disruption, scaling safely. So you have that one side that is a really great side to be on, where you're protecting the business, or there's another side that we don't want to fall under, where we're absorbing fines, we're absorbing federal penalties, we're absorbing, there's rework in the shipments, there's missed customer SLAs, service level agreements, and we effectively, in that area, or in the red area, I like to call it, erode credibility, which is really huge if the organization is really geared towards increasing business. That makes an impact. So, where do we go from here? before I get into that, um, obviously I have quotes and I love quotes, but systems drive compliance and compliance drives EBITDA. That's the thought process. Your habits become the company's system. So, after everything that I've reviewed from a DG perspective, from an environmental perspective, from an EHS perspective, a quality perspective, everything that we do engages the company's system. So we have to ask ourselves these questions. Do you require structured governance or allow fragmented ownership? That's a really major question, especially in EHSQ. It has to be clearly defined in terms of how we structure governance. And all too often, especially in larger companies, you do have silos. Sometimes there are silos. Sometimes there's a bit of fragmented ownership, but the magic happens when you're able to figure out how to make everything work with the different departments and ensure that the silos um, reduce the number of silos. Do you fund system capability, whether it is, I mentioned once again things that are kind of specific to dangerous goods, warehouse management systems, platforms that support shipping, dangerous goods, automation. But this can really kind of be widened or opened up to any function from a compliance perspective. Do you demand margin visibility? That's a really huge one. So, how often are we, with the goals and the metrics that we're reporting on, how often do we ensure that there's visibility from a margin perspective that is being reported out to the company? Do you enforce RFP gateway controls? When I mention this, it's really typically in terms of businesses that are building relationships with lots of different customers, um, and it's in reference to ensuring that that process um, has gateway controls to ensure that everything is properly priced, and all of the not only everything is properly priced, but all of the considerations are being made from a compliance perspective. And then finally, do you escalate systemic regulatory risk, or is it contained? So, a lot of times I've seen across a lot of different organizations. Some organizations do appear to do a pretty good job at escalating systemic regulatory risk, and some I've noticed will kind of de escalate that process. Perhaps once again, it kind of falls into that fragmented ownership and governance. So I've seen both. I've seen some organizations do it really well, I've seen some um, that could do, could stand for a little bit of support in that area. But that is something that, once again, is a system. And once again, you can't necessarily meet the goal unless you have the proper system in place. So, EBITDA will always fall to the level of our compliance systems. I thought about this and added it in kind of at the last minute, but it absolutely will. And one of the challenges from an EHSQ perspective is, how do we communicate about compliance in a manner that operations absolutely understand? That's the biggest, for me, that's a huge takeaway, right? We have to focus on performance, we have to improve. We don't want to erode EBITDA, but how do we communicate about compliance in a manner that operations absolutely understands? Going back to that story about um, atomic habits and how you have this British cycling team that they weren't really performing well in the beginning. They made all these small changes, and it eventually led to them winning these gold medals. right? That translates really over to the business. So EBITDA, it reflects for every organization. That's something specific or is wide enough for every organization. It reflects operational performance, but it also reflects or it tells us how profitable an organization is. So, just the same way that we have certain things that we can do from a performance perspective, 1% better every day, we can also have certain things from a compliance perspective that we're either getting 1% better every day or we're getting 1% worse every day. And then before I know I like to talk about this quite a bit, and I'm probably running out of time, but another thing that I did want to mention too is from an EHS perspective, or EHSQ, or DG, dangerous goods, or environmental perspective, one of the things that I found is um, really helpful when communicating with operations, and that's what the bulk of this PowerPoint was about, is speak from a financial perspective. It's real that will get you further in a conversation than simply saying, well, we're out of compliance. Or especially one of the biggest things that one of my mentors challenged me to think about is cost avoidance. Sometimes we mention cost avoidance so much that teams are um, they're overexposed to that word, right? So it no longer has the impact. It potentially no longer has the impact that it used to have, right? So instead of cost avoidance, how can you, as an EHSQ professional or as an individual supporting an organization, how do you tie it back to EBITDA and bottom line, top line growth? I'm going to close out this discussion now and kind of open the room up for discussion. Abby, forgive me because I don't have any indication of the time on my screen, so if I went over, my apologies. But I want to open up the room for discussion now.
No, you're pretty much on the spot here, 12:33. So it looked like we had one question, and I don't know if it was from Kay Campbell. I'm not sure if you still wanted to ask that question you had about food products and supplements.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. It was more about the categories. I think you had, let me just go back in here. You had where dangerous goods exist within each industry, and you had manufacturing, chemical, pharmaceutical, uh, aerospace, aviation, electronics, and technology, agriculture, mining, construction, retail, and e-commerce. You had healthcare and medical, and I'm assuming that that's where like food products and some supplements would fall. Or I guess there could be a cross into pharmaceutical and retail.
That's a really good question. And to your point, yes, that could be a cross into like e-com, um, because you do have the different food products, the packaged food products. They're not typically regulated under DOT hazardous materials rules, and they're really treated as normal consumer goods. But then you do have those products that um, contain alcohol or utilize dry ice to ship out, or maybe you have the aerosol food sprays. So in that case, um, you have the non-hazmat aspect, but then you have a hazardous component, not of the food itself, but of the product in the food that kind of triggers that regulation. Does that answer
Yeah,
your
like
question?
FDA, I'm assuming.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
FDA, interestingly enough, when we start to talk about FDA, that is a whole nother, like a whole world of compliance requirements,
Hmm.
right? I worked for some facilities that were actually food facilities, and they had the manufacturing best practices and stuff like that in place. And that is a whole world of compliance requirements. They kind of overlap at times if you have some type of FDA product and then it falls into like a hazmat, some of the hazmat
Hmm.
rules. Yeah,
Cool. Thank you.
very good, very good call.
Anybody else got any questions?
I am going to
All right. Well, thank you so much,
forward
Jade. That was
to.
great. I really, really appreciate you putting that together for us and kind of putting it, like you said, in that EHS perspective and how it applies for us in our day to day. So it was awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely my pleasure. If anyone has any questions or would like to further the discussion or would like additional insight onto specific topics that I mentioned, I know that DG is a bit, it can get very, very technical. And for the sake of this conversation, I tried to avoid the most of the technicalities. So feel free to reach out to me. I am going to share my LinkedIn page. So if you have questions or um, concerns or anything, or you like to talk about DG because you're one of those individuals, just reach out.
Awesome. Well, and that CEU link was in there too, guys. So make sure you get your name and email in there so I can get you the CEU link and the feedback form. And again, this was being recorded. I mentioned this to Jade. I didn't say at the beginning to everyone else. So we will post this on our Region 3 YouTube page. So feel free to share that, if you know somebody else who just couldn't make it but might benefit. So all right. Well, thank you guys so much for jumping on. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jade. Thank you for coming, everybody else. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, guys.